"Will you do everything I tell you to?" asked the millionaire to the new secretary. She said yes, without imagining what she was getting into. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comments saying where you're listening from. Let's continue. The cold wind of New York cut through the windows of the 30th floor like invisible blades, but Vincent Blackwood didn't even blink at the tempered glass that separated his office from the urban chaos below. His dark, almost black eyes reflected the city lights with a coldness that intimidated even his oldest partners. At 44, he had built a digital security empire that spanned 3 continents, but his greatest fortress had always been his own heart, armored, inaccessible, dead to anything resembling vulnerability. That Monday morning, Vincent observed the movement on the streets with his usual disinterest when his secretary Martha knocked on the door. The 50-year-old woman, efficient and discreet, had worked for him for more than a decade and knew exactly how to behave in his presence. Few words, calculated movements, no familiarity. "Mr. Blackwood, the resumes for the personal assistant position have arrived," she said, placing a leather folder on the mahogany desk. Vincent didn't even turn around. "How many candidates?" 12. "All with experience, graduate degrees, fluency in languages?" "Discard them all." His voice was low, but cutting like ground glass. Martha hesitated. It wasn't unusual for him to dismiss candidates without even looking at their resumes, but this time seemed different. There was a tension in the air that she couldn't decipher. "Sir, may I ask what specific criteria you're looking for?" Vincent finally turned around and his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her involuntarily take a step back. "I want someone with no experience, someone who doesn't know the rules, someone pure." The word left his lips like an undue confession, loaded with a meaning that even he didn't completely understand. Martha nodded, confused, but didn't dare to question. "Post a new advertisement for recent graduates, no previous experience, and schedule the interviews for tomorrow." As Martha withdrew, Vincent returned to the window. His fingers drummed against the cold glass, a nervous habit that few knew about. Something had been wrong with him lately. Nightmares that returned with renewed force, memories that insisted on emerging from the depths where he had buried them 20 years ago. A girl covered in blood, a promise whispered before a closed coffin, and a guilt he carried like a stone in his chest. The following morning, the candidates began to arrive. Vincent watched them through the security cameras, analyzing every movement, every gesture, every expression. They all seemed cut from the same mold, ambitious, calculating, dressed to impress. One by one, they were dismissed after a few minutes of interviewing with Martha, until she appeared. Emma Sullivan got off the bus on 5th Avenue 15 minutes early, holding a simple folder and wearing a navy blue outfit that clearly wasn't new, but was impeccably clean and ironed. Her brown hair was tied in a discreet bun, and she carried a small Bible in her purse, a habit from her years in the convent that she had never been able to abandon. When she entered the building's lobby, Vincent saw her for the first time through the cameras. Something in his chest contracted painfully. She was exactly as he had imagined, but at the same time completely different. There was a purity in her movements that wasn't staged. It was genuine, almost disturbing in its simplicity. Martha led her to the meeting room, where the interview was to take place. But Vincent couldn't stay in his office. For the first time in years, he got up without a rational reason and went down to the 28th floor. When he opened the door to the meeting room, Emma was sitting with her back to him, answering Martha's questions in a soft, almost musical voice. Hearing the door open, she turned around. Their eyes met. Vincent felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Those eyes, he knew them. Not exactly as they were now, more mature, deeper, but the essence was the same haunted purity he had seen 20 years ago, on a night he had been trying to forget for 2 decades. "Mr. Blackwood," Martha stood up, surprised. "I thought you were in a meeting." But Vincent didn't hear her. He continued to stare at Emma, who had lowered her eyes timidly, but didn't seem intimidated. There was something about her that resisted his dominating presence, not with rebellion, but with a silent strength that he had never encountered before. "She's the one," he said, without taking his eyes off her. Martha blinked, confused. "But, sir, we haven't finished." "She's the one," he repeated, with a firmness that admitted no questions. "Prepare the contract." Emma finally raised her eyes again, and Vincent saw a spark of curiosity mixed with a healthy fear. She wasn't naive, just inexperienced. There was a crucial difference that he knew how to recognize. "Thank you, sir," she said, with a voice that trembled slightly. Vincent nodded once and left the room without saying anything else. But as he walked back to the elevator, he knew that something fundamental had changed. For the first time in 20 years, he had found someone who could break all his rules, and that terrified him as much as it excited him. The contract that Emma signed the next day was 23 pages long. She read each page twice, sitting in the office reception while waiting for Martha's instructions. Absolute confidentiality, total availability, unrestricted obedience. The words danced in front of her like small legal traps that she didn't fully understand, but signed anyway. She needed that job more than she needed to understand its implications. Her desk was in a discreet anteroom, directly connected to Vincent's office by a frosted glass door that she had never seen open. During the first 3 days, she received her instructions through Martha or through typed notes left on her desk every morning. Simple tasks: organizing files, scheduling meetings, answering emails whose importance she couldn't measure. It would have been almost boring if not for the constant feeling of being watched. Vincent spent hours in his office without leaving, but Emma could feel his presence through the glass wall like a physical pressure. Sometimes, when she looked up from the computer, she would see his silhouette standing in front of the window, motionless like a statue. Other times, she heard him speaking on the phone in Italian, his low and controlled voice floating to her like a dangerous whisper. On Wednesday night, when everyone had already gone home and the office was immersed in the typical silence of skyscrapers after hours, Emma found the first different note on her desk. It wasn't typed like the others. It was handwritten, in an elegant and firm masculine calligraphy on company letterhead. "Are you sure you'll do everything I order?" Signed only with a V. Emma held the paper up to the lamplight and felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in the question that went beyond the professional, something that touched regions of her mind that she preferred to keep locked. She put the note in her purse and went home, but couldn't sleep. She lay in the small apartment she shared with 2 college friends, looking at the ceiling and wondering what kind of game had started without her permission. The next morning, she found her answer written in her own hand on a simple piece of paper, left in the same position where she had found the question. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood." The note had disappeared when she returned from lunch. From that day on, Emma's routine changed completely. The normal tasks continued but were added to by others, strange and seemingly meaningless. On Monday, she found a dark blue tie on her desk with a note. "Choose which knot I should use today, with your eyes closed." On Tuesday, it was a question about her dreams. "Report in writing what you dreamed last night. All the details." Emma obeyed each instruction with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She chose the ties without seeing, trusting only her touch and an intuition that she didn't know where it came from. She wrote her dreams in intimate details that she had never shared with anyone. Dreams of rain, of dark corridors, of a male voice calling her name in a language she didn't understand, but that made her wake up with her heart racing and an inexplicable moisture between her legs. The dresses began on Wednesday. A simple note: "Wear green today." Emma didn't have many green clothes, just a simple dress she had bought in a sale years ago. When she arrived at the office, she noticed that Vincent was watching her more attentively through the frosted glass. On Thursday, she was to wear blue. On Friday, red, a color she had never worn, and that forced her to buy a new piece with money she barely had. Each color seemed to awaken something different in him. With green, she saw him spending more time standing in front of the window, thoughtful. With blue, he spoke more on the phone, his voice tenser. With red, he had left the office twice just to get water from the cooler next to her desk, something he had never done before. "Why do you ask me to wear specific colors?" she asked on a Friday, when she found enough courage to intercom his office. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before he responded. "Because colors are memories, Emma. And memories are the only thing we can't completely control." It was the first time he had pronounced her name. His voice saying Emma was like a rough caress that she felt slide over her skin like silk and sandpaper at the same time. "What memories, sir?" Another silence. "Memories that aren't yours to know. Yet." The call ended, but the word "yet" echoed in Emma's mind for days. There was an implicit promise in it, or perhaps a threat. She couldn't decide which of the two frightened her more. That night, alone in her apartment, Emma looked at herself in the mirror, wearing the red blouse she had bought. The color enhanced the golden tone of her skin and made her eyes appear darker, deeper. For the first time since she had started working for Vincent, she saw herself as a woman, not just as an employee, and that disturbed her more than any mysterious note. Because deep down, she was beginning to like that dangerous game. She was beginning to look forward to the notes, the colors, the moments when she felt his eyes on her through the frosted glass. She was beginning to imagine herself on the other side of that wall, face to face with the man who seemed to know her better than she knew herself. And this discovery about herself was more frightening than any mystery that Vincent Blackwood might be hiding. Vincent hadn't slept properly in 2 weeks. Every night when he finally managed to close his eyes, he was haunted by the same nightmares that had tormented him for 2 decades. Only now they were different, clearer, more painful. The blood-covered girl had a face, Emma's face. The screaming woman had a voice that he recognized from the corridors of the convent, where he had spent his troubled childhood. And the promise made before the closed coffin now had a name, Emma Sullivan. He knew he was playing with fire. Each note he left on her desk, each color he chose for her dresses, each intimate question he asked about her dreams, all of this was part of a ritual that he himself didn't completely understand. It was as if he was trying to reconstitute something that had been broken a long time ago, using Emma as a central piece of a macabre puzzle that only he could see. On Monday morning, Vincent made a decision that he knew was dangerous. Instead of leaving the usual note on her desk, he waited until Emma arrived and, for the first time in 3 weeks, opened the glass door that separated their offices. She was organizing the previous week's files, concentrating, when she heard the door open. She turned slowly, and Vincent saw the impact of his presence in her eyes, a mixture of surprise, fear, and something he recognized as repressed desire. "Good morning, Emma." "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood." Her voice was controlled, but he noticed the slight tremor in her hands when she closed the folder she was handling. Vincent approached her desk with deliberately slow movements, like a predator who doesn't want to scare the prey prematurely. He stopped a few inches away, close enough to smell the subtle lavender perfume she wore, a scent that involuntarily transported him back to his own childhood, to sunny afternoons in a garden that no longer existed. "You've been following my instructions perfectly," he said, his voice low and controlled. "That impresses me." "Thank you, sir. But today I want something different." Vincent placed his hands on the desk, leaning slightly towards her. "Today, I want you to tell me about your family." Emma blinked, confused. "My family? Your parents? How they died? What you remember of them?" Her face visibly paled. "I don't like to talk about that, sir. But you'll talk anyway, won't you?" There was a dangerous sweetness in his voice, like honey mixed with poison. "Because you said you would do everything I ordered." Emma looked at him fixedly for a long moment, and Vincent saw something move behind her eyes, a strength he had not expected to find. She didn't lower her gaze or back away. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, in a subtle gesture of defiance that made him smile for the first time in weeks. "My parents died when I was 2 years old," she said, with a firmness that contrasted with the vulnerability of the subject. "In an accident. At least that's what the nuns told me. I don't have real memories of them, just some fragmented images that might be dreams or fantasies." "What kind of images?" She hesitated, but didn't look away. A woman singing, a man in a dark suit laughing, a big house with colored windows and... She stopped as if the next words were too difficult to pronounce. "And?" "Blood. A lot of blood. And voices screaming." Vincent felt a knot form in his throat. Each of Emma's words was like a stab in wounds that he had thought were healed. He moved away from the desk, going to the window, trying to regain the control that he felt slipping through his fingers. "Why do you want to know this?" Emma asked, her voice softer now, almost concerned. Vincent didn't answer immediately. He stood looking at the city below, at the chaotic traffic, and the tiny people running on the sidewalks without knowing that their lives could change in a matter of seconds. When he finally turned to her, there was something different in his eyes, a raw pain that he normally kept hidden behind his carefully constructed defenses. Because sometimes the past comes back to collect, Emma. And when that happens, we need to be prepared to pay. I don't understand. Not yet, but you will. He returned to her desk, but this time kept a safe distance. For today, I just want you to wear black. Complete black. Emma frowned. Black? It's the color of mourning, of penance, of buried secrets. Wear black and think about your family. Think about what you really remember, not what they told you. He paused, his eyes fixed on hers. And if you have nightmares tonight, I want you to write them down. All the details, no matter how painful they may be. Mr. Blackwood, Vincent. The word left his lips before he could control himself. When we're alone, call me Vincent. The name between them created a sudden intimacy that caught them both off guard. Emma parted her lips slightly as if to say something, but couldn't find the right words. Now go. Buy something black to wear tomorrow. And Emma... He headed back to his door but stopped at the threshold without turning around. If you decide you no longer want to participate in this game, you can leave at any time. No one will stop you. And if I decide to stay? Vincent closed his eyes for a second, fighting against the impulse to turn around and tell her everything. About the night 20 years ago, about the guilt he carried, about how her presence was destroying all his carefully constructed defenses. If you decide to stay, then prepare yourself, because what lies ahead will hurt you before it heals you. And I'm not sure if I'm strong enough to protect you from myself. He entered his office and closed the door behind him, but not before seeing Emma's reflection in the frosted glass, standing exactly where he had left her, one hand over her heart, as if trying to contain something that was about to escape. Emma spent the entire afternoon looking for something black to wear. It wasn't a color she usually wore. Her education in the convent had taught her that black was reserved for solemn occasions, for moments of pain and reflection. She finally found a simple dress in a downtown store, using almost all the leftover from her previous month's salary. When she got home, she spent a long time looking at the piece laid out on the bed, as if it were a dark omen of what was to come. That night, the nightmares came with an intensity she had never experienced. They weren't the fragmented images of always. It was an almost complete narrative, vivid and painful like an open wound. She saw herself as a child, hidden behind a heavy curtain, watching unknown men enter the big house with colored windows. She saw her mother, a beautiful woman with dark hair, trying to protect something, or someone. She saw her father falling, blood spreading on the marble floor like spilled red paint. And she saw a boy not much older than she was, hidden behind an armchair with eyes wide with terror. She woke up screaming, her body covered in cold sweat, her heart beating so hard it seemed to want to leave her chest. She sat on the bed until dawn, writing down every detail of the dream in an old notebook, her hands trembling so much that the handwriting came out almost illegible. When she finished, she had 7 pages of memories that seemed more real than anything the nuns had told her about her past. The next morning, Emma arrived at the office dressed in black, the pages carefully folded in her purse. Vincent was already there, standing in front of the window as always. But there was something different about his posture. He seemed tenser, more alert, as if he too had spent a sleepless night. "Did you write?" he asked without turning around when she sat at her desk. "Yes." "Leave it on the desk. I don't want you to hand it to me." Emma placed the pages on the desk and returned to work, but couldn't concentrate. She watched through the frosted glass as Vincent read her account, seeing his silhouette becoming increasingly rigid. At some point, he stopped reading and placed his hands on the desk, head down, as if the words were too heavy to bear. An hour later, the door between the offices opened again. "Come here," said Vincent, his voice hoarser than normal. Emma entered his office for the first time since she had been hired. It was an austere environment, dominated by grey and black tones, with only a few touches of color in objects that seemed to have sentimental value. An old photograph in a silver frame, a worn book on the desk, a dried rose inside a small crystal vase. "Sit down," he indicated a leather armchair in front of his desk. She obeyed, crossing her hands in her lap, trying to maintain her composure despite the nervousness that consumed her. "What you wrote, these aren't fantasies, Emma. They're memories." "I know." The answer came out firmer than she expected. Vincent looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "How do you know?" "Because for the first time in my life, the pieces fit together. The nuns always told me that my parents died in a car accident, but it never made sense. Why would I have these images of a big house? Why do I remember voices screaming? Why? She hesitated, but decided to continue. Why do I have nightmares about you? The words fell in the air like stones in a silent lake. Vincent remained motionless for several seconds, just looking at her with those dark eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. You remember me? Not exactly, but in the dream last night, there was a boy hidden behind an armchair, and when he looked at me, Emma swallowed hard. They were your eyes. Vincent abruptly stood up and went to a cabinet in the corner of the office. He opened a locked drawer and took out a folder yellowed by time. He returned to the desk and opened it in front of Emma. This is the newspaper report from the next day, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Emma read the headlines with her heart in her throat. Businessman and wife killed in home invasion. 2-year-old daughter survives. Police don't rule out targeted hit. There were photos, one of the house she recognized from her dreams, another of her parents, young and smiling, unrecognizable from the violence that had taken them from the world. Why do you have this? She asked, the words coming out in a thin voice. Because I was there, Emma. I saw it all happen. The world seemed to stop around her. Vincent's words echoed in her mind like a distant echo, loaded with a pain that she could feel emanating from him like heat waves. My father had business with my adoptive father's family, he continued, each word coming out with difficulty. Dark business, which I only came to understand years later. That night I was there by chance, hidden, when the men arrived. I saw your parents trying to protect you. I saw them. He stopped, unable to continue. Why did you never say anything? Because I was just a frightened boy. And because later, when I grew up and understood what had happened, it was too late. The case was archived, the evidence disappeared, and you had been placed in the convent under a false name for your own protection. Vincent approached her, stopping a few steps away. I spent the last 20 years trying to find you, Emma. And when I finally succeeded, I discovered that you had become exactly what your parents would have wanted you to be. Strong, pure, principled. So you hired me out of guilt. At first, yes. I thought that if I could take care of you, protect you, maybe I could atone for what I couldn't do that night. He knelt in front of the armchair where she was sitting, his eyes level with hers. But now I don't know if I'll be able to let you go. Emma felt tears running down her face without realizing it. 20 years of unanswered questions, of an emptiness that she had never been able to fill, finally began to make sense. But along with the answers came a new, deeper pain, the understanding that her entire life had been shaped by a tragedy that she didn't even completely remember. I need to go, she said, getting up abruptly. Emma, I need to think. I need to process all of this. She headed to the door but stopped at the threshold. Vincent? Yes? Thank you for telling me the truth. She left without looking back, leaving Vincent kneeling in the middle of the office, surrounded by the ruins of 20 years of secrets, finally revealed. Emma didn't return to work the following morning, nor the next. Vincent spent 2 entire days looking at her empty desk through the frosted glass, a feeling of emptiness spreading in his chest like a slow infection. Martha had discreetly asked about the new assistant's absence, but he had only said that she was dealing with personal issues. In truth, he knew exactly where Emma was. He had placed a discreet security team to protect her as soon as she left the office, not for control, but out of genuine fear. 20 years ago, the people who killed her parents were still alive, still dangerous, and if they discovered that she knew the truth, Vincent couldn't complete the thought without feeling a chill down his spine. The reports reached him every few hours. Emma had left the apartment only once to buy food. She spent the rest of the time reading on the balcony, looking at the horizon as if searching for answers in New York's gray sky. At night, she walked through the small garden of the building, always carrying the same notebook where she had written about the nightmares. On Thursday night, Vincent couldn't stand it anymore. He dismissed the driver and personally drove to the neighborhood where Emma lived, a simple residential complex in Brooklyn, very different from the world of luxury where he lived. He stayed in the car for almost an hour, looking at the lit windows of her apartment, trying to gather the courage to go up. When he finally decided, it was already past 10 at night. Emma answered the door wearing a simple cotton pajama, her hair loose falling over her shoulders, her eyes red from crying. When she saw who it was, she didn't seem surprised. I knew you would come, she said. opening the door for him to enter. The apartment was tiny but impeccably clean and organized. There were books piled in every corner, carefully tended plants in the windows, and a sense of home that Vincent's mansion never had, despite all its luxury. "Your roommates?" "They went to visit family upstate. I'm alone." She sat on the small sofa, indicating that he should sit too. "Why did you come, Vincent?" He remained standing, walking around the small living room like a caged animal. "To make sure you're okay, to apologize for destroying your peace, to—" He stopped, running his hands through his hair. "I don't know why I came. I only know that I couldn't stay away. You spent 20 years looking for me. Now that you've found me, what do you want to do with me?" The question was direct, almost brutal in its simplicity. Vincent stopped walking and looked at her, seeing not the shy employee or the vulnerable orphan, but a woman who had grown through her wounds and found strength in pain. "I want to protect you. I want to take care of you as I should have done that night. I want—" He hesitated, struggling with words he had never said to anyone. "I want you to be happy. Happier than I've ever been able to be. And you think that's possible? Happiness built on guilt and secrets?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I don't think so." Emma stood up and approached him, stopping a few inches away. It was the first time she had taken the initiative to invade his personal space, and Vincent felt the impact like an electric shock. "Then why do you insist on this game, Vincent? Why the notes, the colors, the intimate questions? Why do you make me feel things that a woman like me shouldn't feel for a man like you? Because you make me remember that I still have a soul. And that terrifies me." She raised her hand and touched his face lightly, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a gentleness that made him close his eyes involuntarily. "I spent these 3 days thinking about everything you told me, about my parents, about that night, about how our lives intertwined in such a strange way." Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "And you know what I discovered?" "What?" "That I can't hate you. No matter how hard I try, no matter how many times I remind myself that you were somehow part of the destruction of my family, I can't hate you." Vincent opened his eyes and saw tears running down her face. "Actually, it's worse than that. She stopped, as if the next words were a sacrilege. "You what?" "I think I'm falling in love with you, and it's destroying me inside." The confession fell between them like a silent bomb. Vincent felt the world spinning around him, all his carefully constructed defenses collapsing at once. He held her face between his hands, his thumbs wiping away the tears that continued to flow. "Don't fall in love with me, Emma. I'm not a good man. I've done things you can't even imagine to get where I am. I know, and I don't care. You should care. Why? Because you have blood on your hands, because you built your fortune on the bones of others, because you're dangerous and controlling and have a darkness inside you that scares even yourself." She moved closer, their bodies almost touching. "Vincent, I grew up in orphanages and convents. I know how to recognize the difference between evil and pain disguised as evil. And you're a wounded man trying to punish yourself for the rest of your life for something you did when you were just a frightened child. Emma, let me finish." Her voice had a new firmness, an authority that he had never seen in her. "You want to redeem yourself? Then stop trying to protect me from you and start protecting yourself from yourself. Stop hiding behind the games and the notes and tell me what you really want." Vincent looked into her eyes for a long moment, seeing his own soul reflected there. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with emotion. "I want you, Emma. I want you in a way that goes against everything I believe about myself. I want to wake up with you by my side. I want to hear your voice saying my name. I want to protect you from the whole world, including from myself. I want to love you as you deserve to be loved, even knowing that I don't deserve that privilege." She smiled through the tears, a sad and beautiful smile that broke his heart into 1,000 pieces. "Then love me, Vincent. Stop fighting against yourself and love me." He kissed her then, a desperate and hungry kiss, loaded with 20 years of guilt, 3 weeks of repressed desire, and a love that was born from destruction and fed on redemption. When they separated, both were trembling. "I don't know how to love without hurting," he whispered against her lips. "Then teach me how to be loved without being broken," she answered. And in that moment, in the small apartment full of books and plants, 2 wounded souls began the slow and painful process of healing each other. Vincent didn't leave that night. He stayed on the sofa that was too small for his tall body. Emma nestled against his chest, both dressed, just holding each other as if the world would end at dawn. She fell asleep first, exhausted by the emotional storm of the last few days. But he remained awake, observing her relaxed face in sleep, memorizing every detail as if it were the last time he would see her. For the first time in decades, Vincent felt at peace. Not the cold peace of calculated solitude that he had cultivated for so long, but a warm, vulnerable peace, frightening in its intensity. Emma's lavender perfume enveloped his senses, and he found himself imagining what it would be like to wake up like this every day, to have someone to protect who would also protect him from himself. When she woke up, the sun was already high and Vincent was in the tiny kitchen, trying to prepare coffee with the basic utensils he found. He seemed out of place there, a tycoon in a wrinkled suit messing with a simple coffee maker, but there was something touching about seeing him strive to take care of her in such a mundane way. "You didn't have to stay," said Emma, appearing at the kitchen door with messy hair and a sleepy expression that made him smile involuntarily. "I know, but I wanted to stay." They drank coffee in silence, sitting at the small kitchen table, surrounded by a domestic intimacy that neither knew how to navigate. It was strange and wonderful at the same time. The most powerful man Emma knew serving coffee in mismatched cups, she sharing cheap jam toast with someone who was probably used to breakfasts served by personal chefs. "I need to tell you something," Vincent finally said, his voice loaded with a hesitation that she was already learning to recognize as a harbinger of painful revelations. "What? About the last 20 years? About how I found you?" He paused, turning the cup between his hands. "I didn't just look for you, Emma. I took care of you. From a distance." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "The convent where you grew up. The schools where you studied, the college where you graduated, even this apartment." He gestured around. "All of it was funded by me through foundations and charitable organizations that I created specifically for this." The coffee turned bitter in Emma's mouth. She placed the cup on the table with more force than she intended, the noise echoing in the tense silence that settled between them. You controlled my entire life? I protected your entire life. There's a difference." "Is there?" She stood up abruptly, starting to pace around the small kitchen like a caged beast. "You decided where I lived, where I studied, probably even what kind of education I received. How is that different from control?" "Because I never directly interfered. I never approached you. I never tried to shape who you would become." Vincent also stood up but kept his distance. "I just made sure you had opportunities, security, a chance to become the person you wanted to be. But it wasn't my choice. Nothing in my life was really my choice." The tears were coming back, tears of anger this time. "You took away my right to fight for my own achievements, to fail by my own mistakes. You turned me into a doll, Vincent, into a sophisticated charity project." Her words hit him like punches to the stomach. Vincent saw the pain and anger in her eyes and recognized the justice of her indignation. He had thought he was doing the right thing, but now he realized that he had only exchanged one form of control for another. "You're right," he said, his voice low and defeated. "I tried to control your life the same way I control everything else, because it's the only way I know how to deal with what? With love." The word came out like a confession forcibly extracted. "I don't know how to love without possessing. I don't know how to protect without controlling. I don't know how to care for someone without molding them according to what I think is best for them." Emma stopped pacing and looked at him fixedly. There was something in the raw vulnerability of his confession that pierced her anger like a blade. "Then learn," she said, her voice softer now but still firm. "If you really love me, learn a different way to love." "I don't know if I can." "Then try. For me. For us." Vincent approached her slowly, as if fearing that any sudden movement could break the fragile moment between them. If I really try to change, will you give me that chance?" Emma looked into his eyes for a long moment, seeing not the powerful tycoon or the man who had manipulated her life, but the frightened boy who had witnessed the tragedy that destroyed her family. One chance. Just one. And with conditions. "Which ones?" "First, no more secrets. If there's anything else about me, about my family, about our past, I want to know. Everything. Vincent nodded. I agree. Second, I return to work, but not as your assistant, as your partner. If you really want to protect me, teach me to protect myself. Include me in your business. Let me understand your world. That's dangerous, Emma. There are people who can use me against you, I know. So teach me to deal with them. Make me strong enough to face anything that comes. Vincent hesitated, all his protective instincts screaming against the idea. But when he looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, at the strength she had found in pain, he understood that keeping her weak would be losing her forever. Third, continued Emma before he could respond, and most important, you stop trying to protect me from yourself. Stop creating absurd rules to maintain distance. If we're going to try this, let's really try. Emma, you don't understand. I have impulses, needs, ways of loving that can... She approached him and placed her hand over his lips, silencing him. Then show me, teach me. Let me decide if I can handle who you really are. She removed her hand but didn't move away. Because I suspect that your darkness isn't nearly as frightening as you believe it to be. Vincent held her face between his hands, his eyes searching for any sign of fear or hesitation. He found only determination and a love that he didn't believe he deserved. If I agree to your conditions, if we try this, there will be no turning back, Emma. Once you know everything about me, once you enter my world completely, I won't be able to let you go. She smiled, and it was like seeing the sun rise after a long night. Who said I want to go? He kissed her then, sealing an agreement that both knew would change their lives forever. Outside the window, New York continued its frantic routine, oblivious to the fact that two wounded souls had just decided to heal together, no matter what it cost. The next 2 weeks were like living in two worlds simultaneously. During the day, Emma learned the intricacies of Vincent's empire. Tense meetings with international clients, decisions that moved millions of dollars, corporate secrets that could destroy lives with one phone call. She adapted surprisingly well to the high-pressure environment, her natural intelligence and years of convent discipline helping her to absorb complex information with an efficiency that impressed even the most experienced executives. Vincent fulfilled his promise of total transparency. He showed her the files on her parents' death, the investigations he had secretly funded over the years, the names of the people involved in the crime, some dead, others still powerful and dangerous. He explained how he had built his empire using methods that weren't always ethical, how he had eliminated competitors, bribed authorities, made deals with people who stained his soul with each transaction. I don't want you to love me despite who I am, he said on a rainy afternoon, as they examined documents in his private office in the penthouse. I want you to love me knowing exactly who I am. Emma absorbed each revelation with a calmness that surprised her. Perhaps the years of deprivation and uncertainty in the orphanage had prepared her to accept that the world was a darker place than it appeared. Or perhaps it was simply the fact that, knowing the origin of Vincent's darkness, she could see through it to the wounded light that existed underneath. At night, however, it was different. Vincent had insisted that she move to the penthouse, at least temporarily, arguing that it was safer now that she knew the truth about her past. The apartment was a sanctuary of austere luxury, all in shades of grey and black, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of New York. It was there that Emma discovered the other side of Vincent, not the ruthless tycoon or the man tormented by guilt, but the lover who had deprived himself of real intimacy for so long that he had almost forgotten how to touch her without fear of breaking her. On the first nights, they just held each other, Vincent fighting against impulses that he considered too intense for her, Emma trying to understand her own feelings that were growing like a silent storm inside her chest. He treated her as if she were made of glass, his touches always hesitant, always controlled. You don't need to be afraid to touch me, she said on a Thursday night. When they were lying in his immense bed, she nestled against his chest while he caressed her hair with trembling fingers. I'm afraid of wanting too much, he answered, his voice hoarse in the darkness. I'm afraid of scaring you with the intensity of what I feel. Let me be the judge of that. Vincent moved away enough to be able to look into her eyes. Emma, I spent 20 years depriving myself of anything that resembled true love. Everything I feel for you is amplified, concentrated, dangerously intense. When I touch you, when I kiss you, when I imagine, what do you imagine? He closed his eyes as if the fantasies themselves were too painful to bear. "I imagine possessing you completely, marking you in a way that everyone knows you are mine. I imagine teasing you until you beg, giving you pleasure until you can't form coherent words, loving you in a way that erases any memory of a life without me." His words sent waves of heat through Emma's body, awakening parts of her that she didn't even know existed. Her convent education had kept her protected from her own sexuality for so long that these first discoveries were almost overwhelming. "And why does that scare you?" "Because you are pure, Emma. You deserve to be loved with gentleness, with reverence. And I don't know if I can be gentle when it comes to you." She moved then, climbing until she was on top of him, her hands resting on his broad chest as she looked at him with a determination that left him breathless. "Maybe I don't want gentleness, Vincent. Maybe I want to be loved with the same intensity with which you feel. Maybe I'm tired of being treated as if I would break at the first touch." "Emma, kiss me," she whispered, bringing her face closer to his. "Kiss me as you really want to kiss me, not as you think you should." Vincent fought against himself for several seconds, his decades of discipline waging a war with the desire that threatened to consume him. But when Emma tilted her head and touched her lips to his, soft and provocative, something inside him broke. The kiss that followed was completely different from the previous ones. There was no hesitation, no restraint, only raw need and hunger that he had repressed for too long. His hands buried themselves in her hair, pulling her closer, and he turned her until she was under him, trapped between his body and the mattress. "Are you sure?" he asked against her lips, his voice rough with the effort of maintaining some control. "I'm sure that I want to know all parts of you," she answered, "even the dark parts." It was the permission he had been waiting for without knowing. Vincent kissed her with a passion that was part adoration, part possession, his hands exploring her body through the silk nightgown he had bought for her, the first of many clothes he had chosen, imagining how they would look against her skin. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Vincent rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, trembling with the effort not to go further. "Not tonight," he said, more to himself than to her. "When it's the first time, I want it to be perfect. I want to be sure you're ready for everything that comes with me." Emma smiled, touching his face with a tenderness that contrasted with the fire that had been between them moments before. "Then prepare me," she whispered. "Teach me. Show me exactly what it means to be yours." Vincent opened his eyes and saw in them a confidence that haunted him. She wasn't just accepting his darkness, she was embracing it, asking to be immersed in it. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said, his voice loaded with warning and promise. "Then show me." And in that moment, looking at the woman who had become his obsession, his salvation, and his damnation, Vincent made a decision that would change both of them forever. He would show her who he really was, not gradually, not with excessive care, but completely. And then they would discover together if their love was strong enough to survive the total truth of his nature. The change began the following morning, when Emma found a sealed envelope on the breakfast table. Inside there was a single sheet of paper with instructions written in Vincent's elegant handwriting. "Wear what's on your bed. Meet me at the office at 9 o'clock sharp." And Emma, "Today you learn about trust." On her bed was a dress she had never seen, blood red, in a fabric that seemed liquid against the skin, with a neckline that suggested more than it revealed, and a cut that embraced every curve of her body. It was elegant and provocative at the same time, the type of clothing a woman wore when she wanted to be noticed, desired, remembered. When she arrived at the office, Vincent was on the phone speaking in Italian, his voice low and controlled. He gestured for her to sit in the armchair in front of his desk, but didn't stop talking. Emma realized it was purposeful. He wanted her to observe him, to notice how he commanded the conversation, how his mere presence altered the tone of voice of the people on the other end of the line. 15 minutes later, he hung up and looked at her fixedly for several seconds without saying anything. His eyes traced every line of the dress, every curve it embraced, and Emma felt the weight of his attention like a physical caress. "Perfect," he finally said. "Now come here." She stood up and went around the desk until she was standing in front of him. Vincent remained seated, which put his face at the height of her chest, creating an intimacy that made her heart race. "Today you're going to learn about my real world, Emma. Not just the business, but how I operate within it. how I use influence, how I read people, how I get what I want. He stood up, standing close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. And you're going to help me. How? By being exactly who you are, pure, intelligent, observant. People will underestimate you, will think you're just a pretty decoration by my side. That will give us an advantage. An hour later, they were in an exclusive restaurant in the center of the city, Vincent conducting a meeting with 3 men who clearly feared him more than respected him. Emma remained silent during most of the conversation, observing how Vincent manipulated each word, each pause, each look to get exactly what he wanted. It was like watching a maestro conducting an orchestra where only he knew the music. But it was during dessert that she truly understood what he meant about trust. One of the men, an older businessman with small, cruel eyes, began to talk about her as if she weren't there. Beautiful choice, Blackwood. Very young, very inexperienced. It must be fun to educate one like that. The words came loaded with a lasciviousness that made Emma's stomach turn, but she kept her face impassive as Vincent had instructed. He, in turn, showed no visible reaction, just continued cutting his dessert with precise movements. Education, said Vincent without raising his eyes from the plate, is really a fascinating process, especially when you discover that the student is much more intelligent than she appears. He looked directly at the man then, and his eyes were cold as ice. For example, Emma here noticed that you're wearing a different wedding ring than the one you were wearing in the photos in Forbes magazine last month. She also noticed that you checked your phone 7 times since we arrived, always when your wife was mentioned. She wondered if your meeting today isn't actually a way to escape a difficult conversation at home. The man's face visibly paled. Emma had indeed noticed these details, but didn't expect Vincent to use them as a weapon. It was impressive and slightly disturbing to see how he transformed casual observations into instruments of power. "What I mean," continued Vincent, his voice still low and controlled, "is that underestimating the intelligence of a beautiful woman can be a very expensive mistake. Don't make that mistake with me." The rest of the meeting proceeded in a tense silence, with the 3 men quickly agreeing to all of Vincent's proposals before departing hastily. When they were alone, Emma turned to him. "That was a display of power," she said. "It was a lesson about respect. There's a difference." Vincent took her hand on the table. "In my world, Emma, people will try to use you against me, will try to diminish you to get to me. I need you to understand that never, under any circumstance, should you accept that. And if I can't defend myself?" His eyes darkened in a way that she was learning to recognize as dangerous. "Then I defend you. And that won't be pleasant for whoever disrespected you." Later, in the penthouse, Vincent led her to his private office, an environment she had never seen completely. It was different from the company office, more personal, more intimate. There were old photographs on the walls, books in various languages, objects that seemed to have sentimental value. "There's a drawer in this desk that has always been locked," he said, opening a small drawer of dark wood. "Inside it is everything I've been able to discover about your parents' death over the years." Emma approached and saw piles of documents, photographs, newspaper clippings, some so old that the paper was yellowed. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because there's something you need to see. Something I discovered last week that changes everything." He removed a new folder from the drawer and opened it in front of her. Inside were recent photographs, official documents, and what appeared to be an investigation report. "Your father wasn't just an honest businessman, as the nuns told you, Emma. He was investigating a money laundering network that involved several powerful families in New York, including my adoptive family. He had evidence that could have destroyed dozens of important people." Emma felt the world spinning around her. "And that's why they killed him?" "Yes, but there's more." Vincent turned the page, revealing a birth certificate that she had never seen. "Your name isn't Emma Sullivan. Your real name is Emma Bennett. And according to this document, you weren't just the daughter of the man who was killed. You were the legal heir to a considerable fortune that was hidden after his death. That means you're not just an orphan I decided to protect, Emma. You're one of the richest women in America. And there are people who killed to keep that a secret." He closed the folder and looked into her eyes. "And now that you know, we're both in danger." As if his words had invoked fate itself, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the apartment. Vincent reacted instantly, pushing Emma behind the desk and drawing a gun that she didn't know he carried. "Stay there," he whispered, his voice cold and deadly. "Don't move until I come back." But Emma knew that this time it wouldn't just be about protection. This time, it would be about survival. And for the first time since she had met Vincent, she was afraid that not even he was powerful enough to save them from what was coming. The sound of footsteps echoed through the apartment, slow and calculated, as if the intruders knew exactly where to find what they were looking for. Emma remained crouched behind the desk, her heart beating so hard that she was sure it could be heard throughout the penthouse. Her hands trembled as she held the folder with documents against her chest, as if that could protect her from what was happening. Low voices reached her, conversations in Italian that she couldn't completely understand, but the tone was unmistakable. They were professionals, organized, dangerous. She heard Vincent moving silently through the room, his footsteps almost inaudible even to her who knew every sound he made. The shooting, when it began, was brief but intense. 3 shots, a muffled scream, the sound of something heavy falling to the floor. Then deadly silence that extended for interminable minutes until Vincent appeared at the office door, blood running from a cut on his forehead, his white shirt stained with red. "We're leaving. Now," he said, extending his hand to her. "Vincent, you're hurt. It's not my blood. At least not all of it." He helped her to stand up, his eyes examining every inch of her for injuries. "Are you okay?" "I am. What happened? Who were they?" "People who discovered that you know the truth, and who don't intend to let that continue." Vincent took a backpack from a cabinet that she didn't know existed, quickly filling it with documents, money, and what appeared to be passports. "We have maybe 10 minutes before more people arrive. They always send groups in waves." 15 minutes later, they were in the underground garage, entering a car that Emma had never seen, a dark sedan, common, totally different from the luxury cars that Vincent normally used. As he drove through the deserted streets of the New York dawn, she finally found the voice to ask the question that terrified her. "Where are we going?" "To a place where they can't find us, at least not immediately." Vincent kept his eyes fixed on the road, constantly checking the rear-view mirrors. "I have a property upstate. Isolated, secure, prepared for situations like this. Do situations like this happen frequently?" For the first time since the attack, he looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Real fear. "No, this is the first time in 20 years that someone has had the courage to attack me directly." He returned his attention to the road. "Which means that discovering about your inheritance changed everything. There are billions at stake, Emma. Money enough to kill anyone who gets in the way." The country house was 2 hours from New York, hidden among mountains covered in forest. It was smaller than the penthouse but comfortable, built more for function than to impress. Vincent led her to the master bedroom, a simple but cozy suite with a fireplace and windows that overlooked a verdant valley. "You'll stay here while I resolve this," he said, placing the backpack on the bed. "What do you mean, resolve?" "I need to find out exactly who ordered the attack. Who else knows about your identity? What is the extent of the threat?" Vincent approached her, holding her face between his hands. "And I need to eliminate that threat permanently." "Eliminate?" The word hung between them, loaded with implications that Emma wasn't ready to face. Vincent saw the understanding dawning in her eyes and sighed. "I warned you that there are parts of me that are dark, Emma. This is one of them. When someone threatens what is mine, I don't negotiate. I destroy. And if I ask you not to do this, if I ask us to find another way, then I would lie to you and do it anyway because there is no other way. Not in this world." He moved away, going to the window. "These people killed your parents. They tried to kill you today. They will continue trying until they succeed unless I stop them." Emma sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the weight of her new reality finally hitting her completely. She was no longer the simple orphan who had fallen in love with the mysterious tycoon. She was an heiress with powerful enemies, a woman marked to die for crimes she didn't even know existed. "How long will it take?" "A few days, maybe a week." Vincent turned to her, and his expression was softer now. "There's enough food here, books, an entire library. The security system is military grade. You'll be safe. And alone." "Alone," he confirmed, approaching again. Unless what?" Vincent stopped in front of her, his hands trembling slightly when they touched her face. "Unless you let me do this right before I leave. Unless you let me love you as I should have done from the beginning." His voice was hoarse, loaded with desire and desperation. "Because if something happens to me, if I don't come back, I want you to know what it's like to be completely mine." Emma looked into his eyes and saw not just desire, but raw vulnerability. Vincent Blackwood, the man who controlled empires and eliminated enemies, was asking permission to love her, terrified by the possibility of never having another chance. "You will come back," she said with a firmness that surprised her. "How can you be so sure?" "Because now I know who you really are, Vincent, and the man who spent 20 years protecting me from afar, who confessed his darkest crimes so that I could choose with knowledge, who risked everything to give me the truth about my past." She stood up, standing close enough to feel his breath. "That man wouldn't leave me alone in the world, no matter what he has to do to come back to me." He kissed her then, a desperate and hungry kiss, as if he wanted to memorize her taste. When they separated, both were trembling. "Love me, Vincent," she whispered against his lips. "Love me as if it were our last night, but come back to me as if it were just the first of many." In the storm that followed, between reverent caresses and urgent passion, Vincent showed Emma exactly what it meant to be loved by a man who had waited his entire life to find his soulmate. And she, in turn, discovered that her purity wasn't fragility. It was strength, a strength that could embrace his darkness without being corrupted by it. When dawn broke, Vincent had already left, leaving only a note on the pillow. "I'll be back in 3 days. I love you more than my own life. Wait for me." Emma held the paper against her chest and smiled through the tears. For the first time since she had met Vincent Blackwood, she wasn't waiting to discover who she was. She knew exactly who she was, a woman strong enough to love a dangerous man, intelligent enough to survive any storm, and determined enough to fight for her future by his side, no matter what it cost. The 3 days stretched into a full week. Emma spent the first 2 days alternating between anxiety and a strange feeling of peace, walking through the property's gardens, reading in the library, trying not to think about what Vincent was doing in the dark streets of New York. On the 3rd day, when he should have returned, the anxiety transformed into real fear. On the 4th day, into despair. It was on the 5th day that she found, hidden in a drawer of the desk in the house's office, an envelope with her name written in his handwriting. Inside was a long letter and a small golden key. "My dear Emma," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means something went wrong. The key is to a safe deposit box at First National Bank, main branch. Inside are documents that prove your real identity and give access to your family's inheritance. Approximately $2.8 billion that were hidden when your parents died. Use that money to build the life you deserve, far from me and the dangers I bring." Emma sat heavily in the armchair, her hands trembling as she continued reading. "I know you're angry with me for leaving without adequate explanations. I know you promised to wait, but I need you to understand. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you because of me. If I don't return, it's because I died protecting our future. And if I died, at least you'll be free to be happy." The tears ran down her face as she read the next lines. "There's one last thing I need you to know. During all these years that I took care of you from a distance, I wasn't just paying a moral debt. I was falling in love with the brave and principled woman you were becoming. Each report about your grades in school, each photo of you graduating from college, each small detail about your life made me love you more. When I finally met you in person, I was already hopelessly in love for years." Emma sobbed, holding the letter against her chest. "You taught me that love isn't control, it's freedom. That protection isn't possession, it's sacrifice. That redemption doesn't come from suffering, but from the ability to love someone more than we love ourselves. Thank you for giving me that. Thank you for loving me even knowing who I really am. I love you today and always, Vincent." Emma cried until she had no more tears, then stood up with determination. If Vincent thought she was going to passively accept a life without him, he was very wrong. She had discovered who she was, not just a rich heiress, but a woman strong enough to fight for her love. And that was exactly what she was going to do. 2 hours later, she was back in New York, driving the spare car she found in the country house's garage. She used her new knowledge about Vincent's world to track his contacts, his bases of operation, his enemies. It was surprisingly easy. Being underestimated as an innocent girlfriend opened doors that would remain closed to anyone else. She finally found him in an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn, tied to a chair, hurt but alive. There were 4 men guarding the place, but Emma had learned more than social etiquette during her weeks in Vincent's world. She had learned to think strategically. The explosion she caused in the electrical system of the neighboring building cut the power to the entire block, creating the perfect distraction. While the guards ran to investigate, she slipped into the warehouse, using the silent movement skills she had observed Vincent use. "You should be at the country house," he said when she appeared behind him, his voice a mixture of relief, admiration, and exasperation. "And you should have been back 2 days ago," she answered, cutting the ropes that bound him. "We're even." Vincent turned to her as soon as he was free, holding her face between his hands as if he needed to make sure she was real. "How did you find me?" "Using everything you taught me about your world, I discovered that the Carson family was who ordered the attacks. They were partners with your adoptive father in the money laundering scheme that my father was investigating. I discovered that they kidnapped you to use as a bargain if I appeared claiming my inheritance." Emma smiled, a fierce smile that he had never seen on her. "And I discovered that underestimating the innocent girlfriend was the biggest mistake they could have made." The sound of sirens began to echo in the distance. "You called the police?" "I called the FBI. With all the evidence about money laundering that I found in the files you showed me, the Carsons will spend the rest of their lives in prison." She moved closer to him, her eyes shining with a determination that left him breathless. "And we're going to be free to live our life together." Vincent kissed her then, a kiss that was gratitude, admiration, love, and promise, all mixed together. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers. "You saved my life, literally. You saved mine first, figuratively and literally." Emma smiled. "I think we're even in that too." 6 months later, they were standing at the altar of the small chapel on the farm that Vincent had bought in upstate New York, far from the dangers of the city, but close enough to maintain the business, now administered jointly, with Emma revealing herself to be a businesswoman as astute as she was compassionate. "Will you still do everything I order?" asked Vincent during the vows, echoing the question that had changed everything between them. Emma smiled, her eyes shining with love and mischief. "Now it's you who does everything I desire," she answered, exactly as she had promised in the letter she never got to send. And when they kissed to seal their union, both knew that they had found not just love but redemption. The healing that comes from 2 wounded souls deciding to heal together, building something beautiful on the ruins of what they were, creating a future they didn't even dare to dream of when they met in that office in New York. Vincent had learned that loving wasn't controlling, it was liberating. Emma had discovered that her purity wasn't fragility, it was strength. And together, they had proved that even the darkest stories can have happy endings when there is enough courage to fight for them. The sun set over the farm, tinting the sky golden as they danced alone under the stars, finally free to love without fear, to live without hiding, to be exactly who they were, 2 survivors who had found in love their greatest victory.